Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Computer Scientist. Tonight, we're drifting into the quiet, nostalgic world of Animal Crossing, a place where time moves slowly, where bells jingle softly in your pocket, and where virtual neighbours become real friends. This is a story about creativity, community, and comfort, but it's also a story about evolution, expectation, and the delicate balance between innovation and familiarity. The Animal Crossing series has been a gentle companion to millions of players across more than 2 decades. From its humble origins on the Nintendo 64 to its explosive pandemic-era resurgence with New Horizons, these games have offered something rare in the world of gaming: a space with no fail states, no time limits, no pressure, just you, a small village, and the passing of seasons. But every rise has its peak, and every peak has its descent. The story of Animal Crossing is not just one of triumph, but also of challenge, criticism, and the complex relationship between creators and their community. It's a story worth examining slowly, thoughtfully, and with the same patience the games themselves have always asked of us. If you enjoy these quiet explorations of technology and gaming history, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments. It helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time. But for now, settle in. Let your breathing slow. And let's begin our journey through the gentle, complicated history of Animal Crossing. To understand Animal Crossing, we must first understand Nintendo in the late 1990s. The company was at a crossroads. The Nintendo 64 had launched with promise, bringing 3-dimensional gaming into millions of homes. But by the turn of the millennium, it was struggling against Sony's PlayStation, which had captured both developers and audiences with its CD-based format and broader game library. Nintendo had always been a company driven by unique philosophies. Where competitors chased graphical power and cinematic experiences, Nintendo pursued accessibility, innovation in play, and experiences that could be shared across generations. This philosophy would become the foundation of Animal Crossing, though nobody quite knew it yet. The architect of Animal Crossing's original concept was a man named Katsuya Eguchi. He had joined Nintendo in the late 1980s and worked on several significant titles, including Star Fox and Super Mario World. But Eguchi carried with him a personal experience that would shape his next creation. When he moved to Kyoto for work, he left behind his family and friends. The loneliness of starting fresh in a new city, without the social connections he had always known, stayed with him. This feeling, this sense of being disconnected from a community, became the emotional seed for what would eventually become Animal Crossing. Eguchi imagined a game where players could form new connections, build relationships, and create a sense of belonging even when physically separated from loved ones. In an era before social media dominated our lives, this was a quietly revolutionary idea for a video game. The development team began experimenting with concepts on the Nintendo 64's 64DD peripheral, a disk drive add-on that was released only in Japan and achieved minimal market penetration. The 64's DD allowed for larger storage and the ability to save data in ways the standard cartridge format couldn't easily support. This technical capability would prove essential for Animal Crossing's design. The core concept was deceptively simple. You would move into a small village populated by anthropomorphic animals. There would be no overarching quest to complete, no final boss to defeat, no princess to rescue. Instead, the game would simply continue, day after day, season after season, mirroring real time. If you played at 8 in the morning, it would be morning in the game. If you played on a Tuesday in October, it would be a Tuesday in October in your village. This real-time gameplay was not entirely new. Games like Seaman on the Dreamcast had experimented with internal clocks that created persistent worlds. But Animal Crossing took the concept further, weaving it into every aspect of the experience. Shops would open and close at specific hours, villagers would wake and sleep on schedules, special events would occur on actual holidays. The game demanded that you engage with it on its own terms, not yours. The development team created a system where the world felt alive even when you weren't playing. Villagers would move in and out, weeds would grow in your absence, letters would arrive in your mailbox. This persistence created a gentle obligation, a soft tug that encouraged regular check-ins without ever feeling like a punishment. It was a delicate balance that would become one of Animal Crossing's defining features. The activities available in this virtual village were deliberately mundane. You could catch fish and bugs. You could plant flowers and fruit trees. You could dig up fossils and donate them to the local museum. You could design patterns for clothing and furniture. You could decorate your home exactly as you wished. And most importantly, you could talk to your animal neighbours, building relationships through repeated low-stakes interactions. The game's economic system revolved around bells, the in-game currency. You earned bells by selling items you collected. You spent bells on furniture, clothing, home expansions, and other decorative elements. There was no concept of failure in this economy. If you needed bells, you could always catch more fish or shake more fruit from trees. The gameplay loop was generous, patient, and fundamentally non-competitive. One of the most innovative features, especially for its time, was the ability for multiple players to live in the same town. On the 64DD version, up to 4 players could create separate houses and characters, all coexisting in the same village. They could leave messages for each other, trade items, and shape the town together. This asynchronous multiplayer, where players didn't need to be online simultaneously to affect each other's experience, was ahead of its time. The art style was warm and inviting, using simple polygonal models with clean textures that evoked a storybook quality. The music, composed by Kazumi Totaka, was equally important to the game's atmosphere. Each hour of the day had its own musical theme, creating an evolving soundscape that reinforced the passage of time. These melodies were gentle, often featuring acoustic instruments, and designed to be pleasant even after hundreds of hours of play. The dialogue system deserves special attention. Every villager had a distinct personality type, and their conversations reflected this. Some were cheerful and energetic, others were grumpy or snooty. Some were lazy, others were athletic. The writing had charm and occasional wit, with villagers commenting on your activities, the weather, or their own lives in ways that felt surprisingly personal. The text-based conversations created space for players to project emotions and meanings onto these simple exchanges. Nintendo released the game in Japan on April 14, 2001, as Dobutsu no Mori, which translates to Animal Forest. It was a modest release, limited by the 64DD's small install base, but something about the game resonated. Word of mouth spread. Players described an experience unlike anything else on the market. It was relaxing, yes, but also engaging. It was simple, yet deep. It created a daily ritual that felt meaningful without demanding constant attention. The team at Nintendo recognized they had something special, but the 64DD's failure as a platform meant the game would reach only a tiny fraction of potential players. A decision was made that would prove crucial to the series' future. They would port Dobutsu no Mori to a standard Nintendo 64 cartridge, making it accessible to the millions who own the console, but not the peripheral. This version launched in Japan in December 2001, and while it lost some of the 64DD's features, It retained everything essential to the core experience. By this point, Nintendo's next console, the GameCube, had already launched in some territories. The team made another pivotal decision. They would bring Animal Crossing to the GameCube for its Western debut, translating and localizing it for North American and European audiences. This process would be more complex than a simple translation, as the game was deeply rooted in Japanese culture, holidays, and social customs. The localization team, led by Nintendo of America's Treehouse division, faced a significant challenge. How do you translate a game about everyday life when everyday life looks different across cultures? They approached it with creativity and care. Japanese holidays were replaced with Western equivalents where possible. Cultural references were adapted. The dialogue was rewritten to capture the spirit rather than the literal meaning, adding personality and regional flavour that felt natural to English-speaking players. The Western version of Animal Crossing launched on the GameCube on September 15th, 2002 in North America, and later in 2004 in Europe and Australia. Nintendo's marketing faced a unique challenge. How do you advertise a game with no clear objective, no dramatic action, and gameplay that consisted largely of talking to cartoon animals and picking virtual fruit? The marketing materials emphasized the game's uniqueness. Commercials showed real players describing their daily routines in the game, talking about their favorite villages, and explaining how the game fit into their lives, rather than demanding to be the center of them. The tagline captured something essential about the experience, presenting Animal Crossing not as a game you play, but as a place you visit. Initial sales were modest but steady. Reviews were positive, praising the game's charm, innovation, and remarkable ability to create emotional investment in simple activities. Critics noted that Animal Crossing wouldn't appeal to everyone. It required patience, a tolerance for repetition, and an appreciation for quiet, meditative gameplay. But for those who connected with its rhythms, it offered something genuinely special. When you first start Animal Crossing on the GameCube, you find yourself on a train. A cat named Rover sits across from you, making friendly conversation as the scenery rolls by outside the windows. He asks your name, where you're going, and through this casual dialogue you create your character and name your new town. It's a gentle introduction that sets the tone for everything that follows. Upon arriving in your new village, you're greeted by Tom Nook, a tanuki running the local shop. In Japanese folklore, tanuki are shape-shifting tricksters, though the Western localization often refers to him as a raccoon. Tom Nook offers you a house, though you can't afford it yet. No problem, he'll let you work off the debt by doing some odd jobs around town. This introduces you to the core gameplay loop while establishing the game's non-threatening approach to economics. There are no interest rates, no time limits, and no consequences for taking years to pay off your home. The early hours of Animal Crossing are about discovery and routine building. You learn that shaking trees can produce fruit, furniture, or occasionally angry bees. You discover that hitting rocks with a shovel might yield bells or valuable minerals. You find out that the museum's owl curator, Blathers, will accept donations of fish, bugs, and fossils, slowly filling the museum's exhibits with your contributions. Each small discovery adds another layer to your understanding of how this world works. Your animal neighbours provide much of the game's personality. The original GameCube version featured 15 villagers at a time, drawn from a pool of over 200 unique characters. Each belonged to one of several personality types: normal, peppy, lazy, jock, cranky, and snooty. These personalities determined not only how they spoke to you, but also how they interacted with other villagers and what kinds of requests they might make. Conversations with villagers could be surprisingly deep for a game with such a simple premise. They would remember previous interactions, comment on your activities, and occasionally reveal surprising details about their inner lives. A jock villager might challenge you to a bug-catching contest. A snooty villager might criticize your outfit before grudgingly admitting it had some charm. These interactions were never particularly complex, but they created the illusion of genuine relationships developing over time. The game included a letter-writing system that felt revolutionary for its time. You could write messages to your villagers, and they would respond. The game parsed your letters for keywords and emotional tone, generating replies that felt responsive to what you'd written. Villagers would also send you letters unprompted, sometimes including gifts. Parents could write letters to their children playing the same town, creating a form of asynchronous family communication that predated modern messaging apps. Holidays and special events punctuated the calendar, giving structure to the year. In spring, cherry blossoms would bloom, and villagers would gather outside to admire them. Summer brought fireworks shows and bug-catching tournaments. Autumn featured harvest festivals. Winter included Toy Day, where you helped a reindeer named Jingle deliver presents to villagers. These events weren't elaborate gameplay set pieces, but they provided variety and reinforced the passage of time. The real-time clock created interesting dynamics that many players hadn't experienced before. If you worked during the day, shops might be closed by the time you could play in the evening. Some fish and bugs only appeared at certain times or during specific months, meaning you genuinely had to wait for the right season to complete your collections. This could be frustrating, but it also created anticipation and made certain moments feel special. Catching your first coelacanth on a rainy day felt like a genuine achievement. Of course, players discovered they could manipulate time by changing the GameCube's internal clock. This practice, which came to be known as time traveling, was controversial within the community. Some players saw it as cheating, a way to bypass the intended experience. Others argued that in a game with no win condition, there was no such thing as cheating. You could play however you wanted. This debate would persist throughout the series' history, reflecting larger questions about the right way to engage with games designed around patience. The game's visuals were charming but simple, even by GameCube standards. Character models were low-poly, environments were minimally detailed, and the overall aesthetic leaned heavily on clean colours and readable shapes. This simplicity worked in the game's favour, creating a timeless quality that didn't age as poorly as more technically ambitious titles from the same era. The art direction prioritized clarity and personality over realism. Music played an enormous role in establishing atmosphere. Each hour had a unique theme, with morning tracks featuring lighter instrumentation and evening music becoming softer and more contemplative. The hourly transitions were seamless, and after enough playtime, you could identify the time of day by the music alone. Kazumi Totaka's compositions became deeply associated with the feeling of playing Animal Crossing, embedding themselves in players' memories in ways few game soundtracks achieve. The sound design extended beyond music. Rain pattered gently, rivers burbled, tools made satisfying sounds when used. Villagers spoke in a distinctive synthesized voice that Totaka called animalese, a gibberish language that somehow conveyed emotion and personality. These audio elements combined to create a soundscape that was both relaxing and engaging, rewarding sustained attention without ever becoming intrusive. One feature that demonstrated Nintendo's forward-thinking approach was the inclusion of NES games within Animal Crossing. Through various means, such as trading with villagers, participating in special events, or scanning specific cards, players could obtain classic Nintendo Entertainment System titles that were fully playable within the game. You could place an NES console item in your house, interact with it, and play games like Donkey Kong, Balloon Fight, or Excitebike. This was years before Nintendo would launch Virtual Console services, and it added substantial value to an already content-rich package. The game supported connectivity between the GameCube and Nintendo's handheld system, the Game Boy Advance. By connecting a GBA to the console, players could visit a special island location, design patterns more easily with the handheld's touch-free interface, and transfer items back and forth. This cross-platform functionality was ambitious for its time, though it required hardware not every player owned. As months passed after release, Animal Crossing developed a dedicated following. Online communities formed where players shared town designs, trading strategies, and stories about their favourite villagers. Game facts guides became extensive resources documenting every fish, every bug, every furniture item, and every villager personality quirk. Players created their own events and challenges, like cataloguing every item or creating elaborate town designs that told visual stories. The game's sales trajectory was unusual. Rather than spiking at launch and declining, Animal Crossing sold steadily over years, driven by word of mouth and its appeal across demographics. It found audiences among young children, but also among adults who appreciated its meditative qualities. It appealed to hardcore gamers looking for something different from the action-heavy titles dominating the market, and to casual players who had never considered themselves gamers at all. By the time the GameCube generation ended, Animal Crossing had sold approximately 2.7 million copies worldwide. These numbers were respectable but not blockbuster level. However, the game had achieved something more valuable than immediate commercial success. It had established a dedicated community, proven the viability of its unique design philosophy, and created a template that future entries could refine and expand. Critics and players alike recognized that Animal Crossing represented something meaningful in gaming's evolution. It demonstrated that games didn't need conflict, competition, or clearly defined victory conditions to be engaging. It showed that virtual spaces could provide comfort, routine, and social connection in ways that complemented rather than replaced real-world experiences. These ideas would become increasingly relevant as the series continued and as society's relationship with digital spaces evolved. The technical transition from GameCube to DS required compromises and innovations in equal measure. The DS's hardware was significantly less powerful than Nintendo's home console, which meant the development team had to carefully consider what to keep, what to change, and what to add. The result was a game that felt both familiar and meaningfully different from its predecessor. Visually, Wild World adopted a different perspective. Where the original game used a forced perspective that showed both ground and sky, Wild World used a top-down view that showed only the ground plane. This change was partly technical, working within the DS's limitations, but it also served gameplay purposes. The flatter view made navigation clearer and reduced visual clutter on the small screen. The town itself was smaller in Wild World, a necessary concession to the hardware. Fewer acres meant less space to explore, but the development team compensated by making the space feel denser and more purposeful. Every section of town felt meaningful, and the smaller size made it easier to check in quickly during short play sessions. The game understood its context as a portable experience and adapted accordingly. One of Wild World's most significant additions was Wi-Fi connectivity. For the first time in the series, players could visit each other's towns wirelessly, either through local connection or over the internet. This transformed Animal Crossing from a largely solitary experience with asynchronous multiplayer elements into something more actively social. You could invite friends to your town, show them your house, tour their villages, and trade items in real time. The online implementation was both ambitious and limited by Nintendo's cautious approach to online gaming. There was no voice chat, and text communication was restricted to preset phrases and limited custom messages. Friend codes, Nintendo's cumbersome system for connecting players, meant that spontaneous online encounters with strangers were impossible. These restrictions were intended to create a safe environment, particularly for younger players, but they also limited the social potential of the connectivity features. Despite these limitations, the ability to visit friends' towns became one of Wild World's most beloved features. Players would coordinate visits, host events, trade rare items, and simply spend time together in these quiet digital spaces. The game became a platform for socializing, especially among school-age players who could connect with classmates and friends outside of school hours. Animal Crossing had always been about community, but Wild World made that community active and immediate. The customization options in Wild World expanded significantly. Players could create custom designs with more detail thanks to the touchscreen interface, which made pixel-by-pixel editing intuitive and accessible. These patterns could be used for clothing, wallpaper, flooring, and even displayed as paintings. Creative players pushed the system to its limits, recreating famous artworks, designing elaborate outfits, and covering their houses in custom graphics. The museum expanded in Wild World, adding an observatory where players could create and view constellations. Celeste, Blathers' sister, ran the observatory and would help you map out patterns in the night sky. This addition didn't serve any practical gameplay purpose, but it exemplified Animal Crossing's philosophy. Sometimes features exist simply to add charm, to give players another way to express creativity or mark a moment as special. Tom Nook's shop evolved through multiple stages as you spent more bells, eventually expanding into a department store with different sections for furniture, clothes, and other goods. This progression gave long-term players a sense of growth and accomplishment. Your spending wasn't just accumulating items for yourself, but contributing to the town's development. It created a gentle feedback loop where personal investment led to community improvement. The villagers in Wild World received subtle personality improvements. Their dialogue trees were deeper, their comments more varied, and their requests more diverse. They would remember conversations from days or weeks prior, reference events you'd participated in together, and occasionally surprise you with their observations about town life. The illusion of these animals being real neighbours with their own lives continued to strengthen. One notable addition was the introduction of special characters who would visit the town on specific days. Sahara, a camel who sold rare wallpapers and carpets, would appear randomly. Red, a shady fox running a black market tent, offered paintings and furniture that might or might not be legitimate. Katie, a lost kitten, would occasionally need your help getting home. These visiting characters added variety and unpredictability to the weekly routine. The real-time clock remained central to the experience, but Wild World made some adjustments based on feedback from the original game. Shop hours were slightly more forgiving, and more activities were available at different times of day. The game still respected your schedule and the passage of real time, but it was less likely to lock you out of content simply because you could only play at certain hours. Seasonal events returned and expanded. New holidays were added, and existing ones received more elaborate celebrations. The game's calendar felt fuller, giving players more reasons to check in regularly and participate in limited-time activities. These events didn't dramatically alter gameplay, but they provided structure and variation that kept the experience feeling fresh even after months of play. The music in Wild World maintained the series' standard of hourly themes, but with new compositions that suited the portable experience. The melodies were perhaps slightly less complex than the GameCube versions, optimized for the DS's audio hardware, but they retained the essential quality of being pleasant without becoming annoying even after extensive repetition. The sound of rain on your DS speakers became associated with cozy gaming sessions, and the hourly themes became temporal landmarks in players' daily routines. Critics responded positively to Wild World, with many reviewers noting that portability enhanced the Animal Crossing formula rather than diminishing it. The game received praise for its Wi-Fi features, expanded customization, and the smart ways it adapted to hardware limitations. Some critics pointed out that the core loop remained largely unchanged from the GameCube version, which, depending on your perspective, was either comforting consistency or disappointing stagnation. Sales told a more definitive story. Wild World became a massive success, eventually selling over 11 million copies worldwide. It far exceeded the original game's performance and became one of the DS's best-selling titles. The combination of the handheld platform's enormous install base, the improved features, and the word-of-mouth momentum from the first game created perfect conditions for mainstream breakthrough. Wild World expanded Animal Crossing's audience significantly. The DS appealed to demographics that hadn't traditionally engaged with gaming, and Animal Crossing's approachable design made it an ideal gateway. Parents played alongside children. Adults who hadn't touched video games in years found themselves checking their towns daily. The game became a cultural phenomenon in a way the GameCube original never quite achieved. The portable format also changed how players engaged with the game's temporality. Because you could bring your town everywhere, the temptation to check in became stronger. The barrier to entry for a quick session was lower. This convenience was largely positive, but it also highlighted one of Animal Crossing's persistent design tensions. How do you create meaningful routine without creating obligation? How do you reward regular play without punishing absence? Some players found that Wild World's portability and improved connectivity actually increased their sense of obligation to the game. Weeds grew faster than in the original. Villagers would comment on your absence if you didn't play for a few days. The game's gentle encouragement to return began to feel, for some players, less like an invitation and more like a demand. This was never the developer's intention, but it revealed a challenge inherent to the series' design. The modding and exploitation community also grew around Wild World. Players discovered ways to manipulate the game's code, generating rare items, cloning furniture, and creating perfect towns through methods the developers never intended. Nintendo generally took a permissive stance toward these activities, recognizing that in a game with no competitive elements, there was little harm in players choosing to circumvent intended progression. Wild World's community extended far beyond the game itself. Fan sites proliferated, offering trading forums, design sharing, and extensive guides. YouTube was still young, but early gaming video creators found success documenting their towns, sharing tips, and creating narratives around their villager interactions. The game became a platform for creativity that extended into multiple media. When Nintendo announced Animal Crossing City Folk for the Wii in 2008, expectations were high. Wild World had been a phenomenon, proving that the series could reach mainstream audiences. The Wii itself was a cultural juggernaut, bringing gaming into households that had never owned consoles before. City Folk seemed positioned to be the series' biggest success yet. The The reality proved more complicated. City Folk wasn't a bad game by any measure, but it struggled with a question that would haunt the series going forward. How much should Animal Crossing change between entries? The answer in City Folk's case seemed to be not very much, and players and critics noticed. City Folk's primary addition, as the title suggested, was the city. A bus stop appeared in your town, and taking the bus would transport you to a small urban area with additional shops and services. Here you could visit a salon to change your hairstyle, bid at an auction house for rare items, see a comedy show featuring two axolotl characters named Dr. Shrunk and his student, or attend events at a theatre. The city represented an attempt to expand the world beyond the single-town structure that had defined previous entries. In theory, the city should have been exciting. In practice, it felt somewhat hollow. The urban area was small, consisting of a single street with a handful of buildings. While the services it offered were useful, there wasn't much reason to visit frequently once you'd explored it. The auction house operated on a schedule that required specific timing. The theatre only hosted events occasionally. The city became less a vibrant expansion of the world and more an occasional errand destination. The core town experience remained largely identical to Wild World, just on a television screen again. The perspective, the activities, the progression systems, and even much of the dialogue were carried over with minimal changes. For players coming directly from the DS game, City Folk could feel less like a sequel and more like a port with minor additions. The Wii's motion controls, which were revolutionary in many other games, found limited use in City Folk. You could use the Wii remote to point at the screen for menu navigation, and certain actions like fishing incorporated subtle motion elements, but none of this felt essential or particularly enhancing. The game supported the classic controller, and many players preferred using it, bypassing the Wii's signature feature entirely. Wii Speak, a microphone accessory Nintendo released alongside City Folk, promised to enable voice chat during multiplayer sessions. This could have addressed one of Wild World's limitations, allowing players to actually talk while visiting each other's towns. However, Wii Speak had significant technical limitations. It was designed as a room microphone rather than a headset, which meant audio quality was poor and the system struggled in noisy environments. Its reception was lukewarm, and it never became a standard way to play. The online functionality in City Folk mirrored Wild World's approach, still relying on friend codes and Nintendo's protective online ecosystem. There was no way to interact with strangers, no global market for trading items, and no community features beyond direct friend-to-friend connectivity. While this maintained the safe, controlled environment Nintendo valued, it also felt increasingly dated as other games and platforms were exploring more open online communities. Visually, City Folk was attractive but not impressive by Wii standards. The game used clean, colourful graphics that matched the series' aesthetic, but didn't push the hardware in any meaningful way. The art direction remained charming, but there was little sense that moving to more powerful hardware had enabled new visual possibilities. Everything looked slightly crisper than on the DS, but the fundamental presentation was unchanged. The music continued the series' tradition of hourly themes and seasonal variations. Compositions were pleasant and well suited to extended play, but many tracks were remixes or variations of pieces from earlier games. This continuity was comforting for longtime fans, but it also contributed to the sense that City Folk wasn't breaking new ground. The audio design was competent but conservative. Seasonal events and holidays returned, with most carried over from previous entries and a few new additions. The game maintained the calendar structure that gave Animal Crossing its rhythm, but players who had exhausted these events in Wild World found little new to discover. The comfort of familiar traditions began to clash with the desire for fresh experiences. Critics were generally positive but reserved in their assessments of City Folk. Reviews praised the game's core charm and noted that the Animal Crossing formula remained enjoyable. However, many reviewers expressed disappointment that the game felt more like an expansion than a true sequel. In an era where franchises were expected to significantly evolve between entries, City Folk's conservative approach stood out, and not always in a flattering way. The game sold reasonably well, moving over 3.3 million copies worldwide. These were respectable numbers, but they represented a decline from Wild World's massive success. More telling was the drop-off in player engagement. While Wild World had sustained active communities for years, City Folk's player base dwindled more quickly. The lack of substantial new content meant that players felt like they'd seen everything the game had to offer within a few months. Community discussions about City Folk often focused on what the game lacked rather than what it offered. Players wanted more customization options, more varied villager dialogue, more activities, more reasons to keep playing. This series had established a devoted fan base with specific desires, and City Folk struggled to meet those evolving expectations. One design decision that generated controversy was the addition of grass deterioration. In City Folk, walking repeatedly over grass would gradually wear it away, creating dirt paths. This was likely intended to add visual variety and consequence to player movement, but in practice it felt punishing. Many players found their towns scarred with muddy trails that took months of careful management to restore. The feature added maintenance burden without adding fun, and it became one of the most criticized aspects of the game. The villager interaction system, which had been charming in earlier games, began to show its age in City Folk. The pool of possible dialogue hadn't expanded significantly, which meant that conversations became repetitive quickly. Villagers would repeat the same requests, tell the same jokes, and make the same observations week after week. The illusion of these characters being distinct individuals became harder to maintain, as the pattern behind their programming became more apparent. City Folk represented a turning point for the series, though perhaps not in the way Nintendo intended. It demonstrated that the Animal Crossing formula, while fundamentally strong, couldn't coast indefinitely on its established foundation. Players were ready for evolution, for new systems and features that would expand what the game could be. The next entry would need to take risks and make meaningful changes, or the series risked becoming stale. Despite its lukewarm reception relative to Wild World, City Folk had its defenders. Many players appreciated the return to television-based play, preferring the larger screen and the ability to share the experience with family members in the living room. For newcomers to the series, City Folk offered the full Animal Crossing experience without the baggage of having played previous entries. Its conservative approach was less problematic for those encountering these ideas for the first time. The game also benefited from the Wii's unique position in the market. The console reached audiences who had never been part of traditional gaming demographics, and for many of these players, City Folk was their introduction to video games as a medium. Its gentle pace, lack of fail states, and emphasis on creativity rather than competition made it an ideal entry point. While hardcore fans might have been disappointed, a whole new generation was discovering the charm of virtual village life. City Folk's legacy is complicated. It was neither a disaster nor a triumph. It was a safe, competent entry that maintained the series' core appeal while failing to push boundaries. In retrospect, it seems clear that the development team was still figuring out what Animal Crossing should become as it matured as a franchise. The next game would provide a clearer answer to that question. After the mixed reception of City Folk, The Animal Crossing team found themselves at a crossroads. The series had proven it could reach massive audiences, but it had also demonstrated that simply iterating on the established formula wasn't enough. Players wanted evolution, innovation, and meaningful additions that would justify investing hundreds of hours into a new entry. The team spent years developing the next game, and when Animal Crossing: New Leaf launched on the Nintendo 3DS in November 2012 in Japan and June 2013 elsewhere, it became clear that the wait had been worth it. New Leaf represented the most significant evolution of the Animal Crossing formula since the series' inception. The changes weren't just cosmetic or incremental. They fundamentally altered the player's relationship with their town and introduced systems that addressed many of the criticisms that had accumulated over previous entries. This was Animal Crossing reimagined with confidence and ambition. The most transformative change was also the simplest conceptual shift. In New Leaf, you weren't just another resident moving into town, you were the mayor. This single change rippled through every aspect of the game, giving players agency and control that previous entries had withheld. No longer were you merely decorating your house and hoping villagers would move to convenient locations. Now you could shape the town itself according to your vision. As mayor, you could enact ordinances that changed how the town operated. The beautiful town ordinance prevented weeds from growing and kept flowers from wilting, addressing one of city folk's most criticized features. The early bird and night owl ordinances shifted shop hours to accommodate different play schedules, solving a problem that had plagued the series since its beginning. The bell boom ordinance increased prices at shops, offering an option for players who wanted to accelerate their earning. These ordinances cost bells to enact, but they fundamentally improved quality of life and showed that the developers had been listening to player feedback. The introduction of public works projects was perhaps even more significant than the mayor role itself. These projects allowed you to place infrastructure throughout your town: benches, street lamps, bridges, fountains, clocks, and dozens of other structures. You could choose where they went, creating layouts that were personal and purposeful. Some projects were purely aesthetic, while others served functional purposes like making navigation easier or providing new gathering spots for villagers. Funding these projects required community effort, or at least the fiction of it. You would propose a project and set up a donation station, and over time villagers would contribute small amounts while you provided the bulk of the funding. This system created a sense of working toward long-term goals, giving late-game players something meaningful to pursue. Completing a public works project felt genuinely rewarding, especially when it transformed a mundane area into something beautiful or unique. The customization options in New Leaf expanded dramatically. Cyrus and Reese, alpaca characters running the retail shop, offered furniture customization services. Many items could be recolored or refabricated, multiplying the available variations exponentially. This meant that finding the perfect piece for your home no longer depended entirely on luck or trading. You could take what you had and adapt it to your aesthetic vision. Main Street, New Leaf's answer to City Folk's City, was far more successful as an expansion of the game world. This area featured a row of shops and services that grew and evolved based on your playtime and spending. The Able Sisters clothing shop could expand to include an accessory store. The museum could add a second floor with a gift shop and expanded exhibits. Kix the Skunk opened a shoe store. Leaf ran a garden shop. Each of these establishments offered something distinct, and their presence made Main Street feel like a genuine commercial district, rather than just a menu of services. The museum in New Leaf received particular attention and care. Blathers remained as curator, but the exhibits themselves were more beautifully designed than in any previous entry. The fossil room placed specimens in realistic dioramas. The aquarium featured multiple tanks and a tunnel where you could walk surrounded by fish. The bug exhibit recreated natural habitats. Completing sections of the museum felt like a genuine accomplishment because the results were so visually satisfying. A new shopping area called the island offered yet another expansion of the world. Accessible by boat, the island featured tropical scenery, exclusive items, and most importantly, mini-games. These activities, which could be played solo or with friends online, offered tours that challenged you to catch specific fish, find buried treasures, or complete other objectives within time limits. The island provided a break from the relaxed pace of town life, offering more structured challenges for players who wanted them. The Dream Suite, introduced via a post-launch update, became one of New Leaf's most beloved features. By lying down on a special bed, you could visit dream versions of other players' towns without affecting them or needing the other player to be online. This allowed players to tour elaborate town designs, gather inspiration, and experience creative achievements from around the world. The Dream Suite transformed town design into a shareable art form, encouraging players to think of their towns as exhibitions rather than just personal spaces. Villager interactions received significant improvements. The dialogue pool was expanded substantially, with more varied conversations and responses that took into account your relationship level, recent activities, and current events. Villagers would suggest public works projects, request specific fish or bugs with more context, and have conversations with each other that you could observe. The personality types were refined, giving each type more distinct voice and mannerisms. The friendship system with villagers became more explicit and rewarding. Building relationships unlocked their picture items, which could be displayed in your home like trophies of genuine connection. Villagers would remember your birthday and celebrate it with you. They would visit your house unannounced, and you could visit theirs. These small touches made the relationships feel more reciprocal and meaningful. New Leaf introduced more villager personality types, including the smug and big sister categories. These additions provided more variety in conversation and relationship dynamics. The smug villagers were charismatic and slightly self-absorbed, but ultimately well-meaning. The big sister types were casual and caring, offering a different flavour of kindness than the normal personality provided. With 8 distinct personalities and hundreds of villagers, the chances of 2 players having identical town populations decreased significantly. The visual presentation of New Leaf was a substantial leap forward for the series. The Nintendo 3DS's stereoscopic 3D effect added subtle depth to the world, making the layers of foreground and background more distinct. The art style refined the series' aesthetic without abandoning its essential character, creating environments that were colourful, detailed, and inviting. Character models were more expressive, and animations were smoother and more varied. The game's music continued the tradition of hourly themes, but with a sophistication that matched the overall polish of the experience. The compositions felt more varied and complex than in previous entries, incorporating a wider range of instruments and musical styles. The 7 p.m. theme in particular became iconic among fans for its warm, nostalgic melody that perfectly captured the feeling of evening settling over a small town. Seasonal events in New Leaf were more elaborate and better integrated into the world than in previous games. Characters associated with events would appear in Main Street beforehand, building anticipation. The events themselves featured more activities, better rewards, and dialogue that referenced both current and past celebrations. The calendar felt richer and more purposeful, giving players regular reasons to return. New Leaf also addressed many smaller quality-of-life issues that had accumulated over the series' history. You could now stack fruit in your inventory, reducing the tedium of collection and storage. The save system was improved, making it less punishing if you needed to quit unexpectedly. The interface was cleaner and more intuitive. These changes might seem minor individually, but collectively they demonstrated that the development team had carefully considered player feedback and smoothed out numerous rough edges. The game's approach to multiplayer reflected lessons learned from previous entries. Local and online play were both supported, and the online system, while still using friend codes, was more streamlined than before. The island minigames provided structured activities for multiplayer sessions, solving the problem of previous games where friends would visit each other's towns but struggle to find things to do together beyond shopping and showing off houses. Critical reception for New Leaf was overwhelmingly positive. Reviewers praised the game's improvements, the depth of customization, and the way it respected players' time while still encouraging regular engagement. Many critics noted that New Leaf felt like the definitive Animal Crossing experience, the game that finally fulfilled the series' potential. The addition of mayoral duties and public works projects were singled out as transformative features that gave players meaningful long-term goals. Sales reflected the critical acclaim and player enthusiasm. New Leaf became one of the 3DS's best-selling titles, moving over 12 million copies worldwide. More importantly, it sustained active communities for years. Players continued discovering new aspects of the game, sharing town designs, and building elaborate themed environments long after launch. The Dream Suite ensured that creative achievements had audiences, fostering a culture of sharing and inspiration. The game found particular success in balancing accessibility and depth. New players could enjoy the basic loop of collecting, decorating, and socializing without feeling overwhelmed. Meanwhile, dedicated players could pursue complex town designs, complete item catalogues, and maintain elaborate routines that filled every hour of gameplay with purpose. This balance made New Leaf appealing across a broader spectrum of player types than any previous entry. New Leaf's post-launch support set new standards for the series. The welcome Amiibo update in 2016 added substantial new content, including new villagers, new furniture sets, and new gameplay features tied to Animal Crossing Amiibo cards and figures. This free update arrived years after the game's launch, demonstrating Nintendo's commitment to maintaining and improving the experience even after initial sales had plateaued. The Amiibo integration allowed players to invite specific villagers to their towns, or summon special characters to their campground. This gave players more control over the town composition and provided guaranteed ways to obtain rare items. While some players disliked the idea of features locked behind physical merchandise, others appreciated having options beyond pure random chance for shaping their ideal town. The community around New Leaf was remarkably creative and engaged. Players developed elaborate town themes, Japanese-inspired villages with carefully placed Zen gardens, spooky horror towns filled with dark furniture and ominous patterns, fairy tale settings with stone bridges and flower arrangements mimicking storybook illustrations. The game became a medium for artistic expression, with players spending hundreds of hours perfecting their visions. Online trading communities flourished around New Leaf. Players established elaborate marketplaces where rare items, villagers, and services were exchanged. Some players specialized in specific aspects of the game, becoming known for particular skills like creating custom designs or maintaining catalogues of every furniture variant. The game fostered a gift economy, where experienced players would help newcomers and acts of generosity were common and celebrated. The longevity of New Leaf's community was remarkable even by Animal Crossing standards. Years after release, forums and subreddits remained active with players sharing accomplishments, asking for advice, and organizing online events. The game had achieved something rare. It created a virtual space that people genuinely cared about maintaining and improving, not because the game demanded it, but because they found value in the act of creation and community building. New Leaf represented the pinnacle of the series' evolution up to that point. It demonstrated that Animal Crossing could grow and change in meaningful ways, while preserving the core appeal that had defined it from the beginning. The game expanded player agency without sacrificing the gentle pace and low-pressure atmosphere. It added depth without adding complexity that would alienate casual players. It was, in many ways, exactly what fans had been asking for. In October 2017, Nintendo launched Animal Crossing Pocket Camp for iOS and Android devices. This marked the series' first foray into mobile gaming, a platform that had been transforming the gaming industry for years. The move was part of Nintendo's broader strategy to expand beyond dedicated gaming hardware, bringing their franchises to the massive smartphone audience. Pocket Camp presented an interesting design challenge. How do you translate Animal Crossing's experience to a platform defined by shorter sessions, smaller screens, and fundamentally different business models? The answer, it turned out, involved significant compromises and changes that would prove controversial among longtime fans. The basic premise of Pocket Camp centered on managing a campsite rather than a town. You would complete requests for anthropomorphic animal characters, gathering resources like wood, steel, cotton, and paper. These materials could be used to craft furniture and amenities that would attract different animals to visit your campsite. As you leveled up relationships with these animals, you'd unlock more furniture designs and customization options. The gameplay loop was faster and more directed than mainline Animal Crossing games. Instead of open-ended exploration and self-directed goals, Pocket Camp presented clear objectives tied to animal requests and crafting queues. The game was designed for brief, frequent sessions where you'd check in, complete a few tasks, collect resources, and perhaps spend a few minutes arranging furniture before moving on with your day. This structure aligned with mobile gaming conventions but diverged significantly from Animal Crossing's traditional philosophy. The series had always been about moving at your own pace, pursuing whichever activities interested you at the moment. Pocket Camp, by contrast, gave you specific tasks to complete and used timer-based progression to gate content. Crafting items took real-world time, creating incentives to check in regularly, but also introducing waiting periods that could only be bypassed by spending premium currency. The monetization model was free to play with in-app purchases, standard for mobile games but new for Animal Crossing. Leaf tickets served as premium currency that could speed up crafting, expand inventory, and purchase exclusive items. The game could be played entirely without spending money, but the experience was designed with gentle pressure points that encouraged purchases. Limited-time events offered exclusive furniture that required significant grinding or spending to obtain completely. This business model created tension within the community. Some players appreciated having a free version of Animal Crossing they could play anywhere. Others felt that the monetization corrupted the series' ethos, turning something that had been about patient, reward-free engagement into a system of manufactured scarcity and time pressure. The debate highlighted broader questions about how free-to-play mechanics affect game design and player experience. The visual style of Pocket Camp was bright and appealing, with character models that were more detailed than previous entries had managed on dedicated gaming hardware. The interface was clean and optimized for touch controls. Environments, while limited in scope compared to full Animal Crossing games, were attractive and carried the series' aesthetic charm. From a presentation standpoint, Pocket Camp succeeded in bringing the Animal Crossing look to mobile devices. Social features in Pocket Camp were streamlined and integrated with mobile platform conventions. You could visit other players' campsites, give kudos, and help with tasks. Friend lists were managed through Nintendo accounts rather than friend codes, simplifying connectivity. The game included photo mode features that let you pose your character and animal visitors, creating images to share on social media. These features felt appropriate for mobile gaming's social sharing culture. Seasonal events in Pocket Camp occurred more frequently than in mainline games, with new content arriving monthly or even more often. These events typically introduced themed furniture sets and special activities tied to holidays, seasons, or partnerships with other franchises. The constant stream of new content kept engaged players returning regularly, though it also meant that missing periods of play could result in permanently missing exclusive items. The core feedback loop of completing requests, gathering materials, and crafting furniture could be satisfying in the short term. There was pleasure in the incremental progress, in slowly unlocking new animals and furniture designs, and in arranging your campsite exactly how you wanted. For players seeking a low-commitment Animal Crossing experience that fit into brief moments throughout the day, Pocket Camp delivered adequately. However, the game struggled with the question of the long-term engagement. Unlike mainline Animal Crossing games where activities varied based on season, time of day, and emergent interactions with villagers, Pocket Camp's loop was more repetitive and predictable. The animal requests followed set patterns. The crafting system, while extensive, was ultimately just a matter of accumulating resources and waiting for timers. The absence of fishing tournaments, bug-catching events, or the spontaneous moments that gave console games their charm made Pocket Camp feel hollow by comparison. The villager interactions, which had always been central to Animal Crossing's appeal, were significantly reduced in Pocket Camp. Animals had far less dialogue variety, and conversations rarely felt personal or meaningful. They existed primarily as quest givers and decoration for your campsite, rather than as characters you'd form attachments to. This reduction in personality and relationship depth removed one of the series' most important emotional hooks. Critical reception to Pocket Camp was mixed. Mobile gaming reviewers generally praised it as a well-made, free-to-play game, with good production values and reasonable monetization. Traditional gaming critics and longtime Animal Crossing fans were more skeptical, viewing it as a diluted, compromised version of the series that prioritized mobile platform conventions over the design philosophy that had made Animal Crossing special. Player response followed similar lines. Some embraced Pocket Camp as a convenient way to get an Animal Crossing experience on a device they always carried. Others played briefly before becoming frustrated with timers, limited activities, or the pressure to spend money during events. The game maintained a dedicated player base, but it was smaller and less passionate than the communities around mainline entries. Pocket Camp's existence raised questions about Nintendo's mobile strategy and the Animal Crossing brand. Was this an attempt to reach new audiences who would then transition to console games? Was it a way to maintain engagement between major releases? Or was it simply an experiment in extracting additional revenue from the franchise? The answers likely involved elements of all three, but the execution left many feeling that something essential had been lost in translation. The game received regular updates and seasonal content for years after launch, demonstrating Nintendo's commitment to supporting it. New features were added gradually, including a subscription service called Pocket Camp Club that offered additional convenience features and monthly exclusive items. These updates showed that Nintendo saw Pocket Camp as a long-term project rather than a quick cash grab, though whether that commitment translated into a better player experience remained debatable. Looking at Pocket Camp in the context of the series' broader evolution, it represents an interesting diversion rather than a main chapter. It proved that Animal Crossing could exist on mobile platforms, but it also demonstrated the challenges of adapting a design philosophy built around patience and open-ended exploration to a platform optimized for brief, frequent sessions and monetization through scarcity and timers. The most valuable lesson from Pocket Camp might be what it revealed about what makes Animal Crossing work. By stripping away elements like real-time progression, rich villager interactions, and player-driven goal setting, and replacing them with quest chains, crafting timers, and limited-time events, Pocket Camp inadvertently highlighted how important those original design decisions were. It showed that Animal Crossing isn't just an aesthetic or a setting, but a carefully balanced philosophy of play that doesn't easily transfer across platforms and business models. For many fans, Pocket Camp exists in a separate category from real Animal Crossing games. It's something you might check while waiting in line or during a break, but it doesn't provide the deeper satisfaction or emotional connection that console entries offer. This positioning as a supplementary experience rather than a replacement probably represents the healthiest way to view Pocket Camp's place in the franchise. When Nintendo announced Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch during E3 2018, anticipation was immediate and intense. The series had been absent from consoles since City Folk a decade earlier, and New Leaf had demonstrated the heights the franchise could reach. The Switch, with its hybrid portable console design, seemed like the ideal platform for Animal Crossing's play, anywhere, anytime philosophy, combined with the visual power of modern hardware. The initial reveal was relatively brief, showing a character stepping off a plane onto a deserted island. This setting immediately signaled a departure from the village format that had defined previous entries. Rather than moving into an established community, you would be creating one from scratch. The implications of this change were exciting. A blank slate meant maximum creative freedom, but it also meant rethinking many of the series' established systems. Development continued for nearly 2 years after the announcement, with Nintendo periodically releasing new information that built anticipation. The game would feature extensive crafting systems. Terraforming tools would let players reshape their islands, moving rivers and creating cliffs. 8 players could live on a single island. The customization options would be the most extensive in the series' history. Each detail suggested that New Horizons would be the most ambitious Animal Crossing yet. The game was scheduled to release on March 20th, 2020. This date would prove more significant than anyone could have anticipated. Just as New Horizons launched, much of the world was entering lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people found themselves isolated at home, separated from friends and family, facing uncertainty and anxiety about the future. Into this context arrived a game about building a peaceful community on a tropical island. The timing could not have been more perfect, or more necessary. New Horizons launched into a world hungry for escapism, connection, and comfort. Within the first 6 weeks, it sold over 13 million copies, making it the fastest-selling Switch game and one of the fastest-selling Nintendo games of all time. By the end of 2020, those numbers had grown to over 30 million. Eventually, the game would surpass 40 million copies sold, making it not only the best-selling Animal Crossing game, but one of the best-selling games ever made on any platform. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. Social media flooded with screenshots of players' islands, custom designs, and creative achievements. Celebrities shared their island tours. Museums created digital exhibits within the game. Fashion brands released virtual clothing collections. Politicians held virtual town halls on Animal Crossing islands. The game transcended gaming culture and entered mainstream consciousness in a way few titles ever achieve. The appeal was obvious in retrospect. During a time when physical movement was restricted and social gatherings were dangerous, New Horizons offered a safe space to visit friends, express creativity, and maintain some semblance of normal social interaction. The game became a platform for birthday parties, graduations, weddings, and memorial services that couldn't happen in person. It filled a social void that video conferencing couldn't quite address, providing shared activities and experiences rather than just conversation. The core gameplay of New Horizons built upon New Leaf's foundation, while adding significant new systems. You begin by arriving on a deserted island as part of Tom Nook's Deserted Island Getaway package. The early game involves gathering resources, crafting basic tools, and gradually building up infrastructure. This survival-like beginning was new to the series and created a sense of progression that previous entries had lacked. You weren't just decorating an existing space, but truly building a community from nothing. The crafting system, borrowed conceptually from games like Minecraft, became central to the New Horizons experience. Almost every tool, furniture piece, and decorative item could be crafted from materials gathered around the island. You would chop wood, mine stone, and collect various resources, then use DIY recipes to create what you needed. This system gave gathering activities more purpose than in previous games where collection was often an end unto itself. DIY recipes were acquired through multiple methods: shooting down balloon presents, receiving them from villagers, finding message bottles on beaches, or purchasing them from shops. The randomness of recipe acquisition created a trading economy where players would share duplicate recipes or craft items for friends who hadn't learned certain designs. This fostered community interaction and gave experienced players ways to help newcomers. The most revolutionary addition was terraforming, unlocked after achieving a 3-star island rating. With terraforming tools, you could raise and lower terrain, create cliffs and waterfalls, widen rivers, and fundamentally reshape your island's geography. This feature, more than any other, enabled the creative explosion that defined New Horizons' cultural moment. Players could transform their islands into anything imaginable: elaborate Japanese gardens, spooky horror islands, urban cityscapes, recreational parks, botanical gardens, or fantastical dreamscapes. The visual presentation of New Horizons was the series' most beautiful yet. The Switch's hardware enabled detailed textures, sophisticated lighting, and weather effects that brought the island to life. Morning mist, afternoon sunlight filtering through trees, rain creating puddles and droplets, shooting stars streaking across clear night skies. These atmospheric touches created moments of genuine beauty that players captured and shared endlessly. Character customization reached new heights. You could change your appearance at any time without visiting a salon. More hairstyles, eye colors, and skin tones were available from the start, making the game more inclusive than previous entries. Clothing options expanded dramatically, with the Able Sisters shop offering larger selections and the ability to display custom designs as full outfits, rather than just patterns overlaid on standard clothing templates. The custom design system itself received significant improvements. The pixel canvas was larger, allowing for more detailed patterns. You could create custom designs for specific clothing types, ensuring proper fit and appearance. Most impressively, you could share and download designs through online design portals using creator codes. This feature enabled talented artists to share their creations globally, and players could access designs from fashion brands, museums, and celebrities who partnered with the game. Photography became a major feature through the in-game camera app. You could take pictures from various angles, apply filters, and use the Switch's screenshot function to capture and share these images. The camera enabled players to document their island's evolution, create posed scenes with villagers, and capture atmospheric moments that showcased the game's visual beauty. This aligned perfectly with social media culture and contributed to New Horizons' viral spread. Multiplayer in New Horizons offered more options than previous entries. Local wireless play allowed up to 8 players on one island simultaneously. Online play required a Nintendo Switch online subscription, but enabled visiting friends' islands, hosting guests, and participating in the in-game economy through trading and cataloguing items. The Dodo Airlines airport served as your gateway for travel, with Orville the Dodo providing friendly service for your journeys. However, multiplayer had significant limitations that frustrated many players. Only one player could actively use tools or menus at a time, creating awkward waiting periods during group activities. Entering or leaving an island triggered lengthy animations that interrupted everyone's gameplay. Online communication was limited to preset phrases or the Switch's text chat, with no voice communication built into the game. These restrictions, intended to maintain Nintendo's safe online environment, created friction that dampened the multiplayer experience. One of the most controversial design decisions was the single island per console restriction. Unlike previous entries where each player profile could have their own town, New Horizons limited the Switch to one shared island regardless of how many users played. The first player to start the game became the resident representative with full permissions, while additional players were subordinate residents with restricted abilities. They couldn't progress the main storyline, couldn't place or move buildings, and had limited creative control. This decision caused significant problems for families sharing a Switch. Children couldn't progress their own islands independently. Siblings had to cooperate and compromise in ways that often led to conflicts. Parents who wanted to play without affecting their children's experience had no option to do so. Nintendo's stated reasoning involved technical limitations and ensuring the island felt like a shared space, but many players felt this restriction was arbitrary and harmful to the experience. The early game progression in New Horizons followed a structured path overseen by Tom Nook. You would complete objectives, unlock new buildings, and gradually transform your deserted island into a functioning community. This provided more guidance than previous entries, which some players appreciated and others found restrictive. The game took several real-world weeks to fully open up, gating features behind progression markers that couldn't be rushed without time travel. Once you achieved certain milestones, the game would open up significantly. KK Slider, the musical dog who had appeared in every entry, would visit your island for concerts. Isabel would arrive to help with island management. Special visitors would appear randomly on weekdays, offering unique services or items. The museum would expand. Your home would grow through multiple upgrades. The sense of progression was satisfying, though it took considerable time investment to reach the point where all features were available. Seasonal events returned, but with a crucial difference from previous entries. Instead of being programmed into the game at launch, events were delivered through mandatory updates. This meant Nintendo could adjust events based on player feedback and current circumstances, but it also meant the game felt incomplete at launch. Early adopters experienced months where expected seasonal content simply didn't exist yet. Halloween, Thanksgiving, and winter holidays arrived as updates rather than being available from day one. This update-based approach generated mixed reactions. Some players appreciated receiving fresh content over time, feeling it gave them reasons to return. Others felt frustrated that they'd purchased what seemed like an incomplete game that would only reach its full potential after months or years of updates. The debate highlighted changing expectations about what constitutes a complete game in an era of live service and continuous development. The villagers in New Horizons, while visually charming and well animated, represented one of the game's most criticized aspects. The dialogue pool was significantly smaller than New Leaf's, resulting in repetitive conversations. Villagers had fewer distinct personalities within their types, making individual characters feel less memorable. They would repeat the same few topics and reactions, rarely referencing your shared history or commenting on island changes in meaningful ways. This reduction in villager personality was particularly disappointing given how much the rest of the game had evolved. Players who had loved building relationships with their New Leaf neighbours found the New Horizons villagers shallow by comparison. Some speculated that development resources had been focused on new systems like crafting and terraforming at the expense of dialogue depth. Whatever the reason, the less engaging villagers removed some of the emotional core that had made previous entries feel alive. The museum in New Horizons was magnificent. Blathers returned as curator, and the building itself was a masterpiece of design. The aquarium featured a massive main tank, specialized environments for different species, and truly impressive use of lighting and space. The fossil hall presented specimens in dramatic poses with informative plaques. The bug exhibit recreated diverse habitats. The art gallery, added in an early update, displayed paintings and sculptures in a refined gallery space. Completing the museum felt rewarding because the result was so visually stunning. Nook Miles, a new achievement and reward system, provided structured goals for players who wanted them. You would earn miles for completing various tasks, catching specific numbers of fish, talking to villagers, planting flowers, or participating in events. These miles could be spent on special items, recipes, or tickets to visit randomly generated mystery islands, where you could gather resources and potentially recruit new villagers. The system gave completionists clear objectives while remaining optional for players who preferred unstructured play. The Nook shopping catalogue allowed you to order items you'd previously owned, solving storage problems and making collecting more manageable. You could purchase 5 items per day, which would arrive in your mailbox the next day. This system encouraged visiting friends to catalogue their items, creating a community-driven approach to collection that fostered social interaction and cooperation. Special characters appeared on a rotating schedule. Celeste visited during clear nights when meteor showers might occur, offering recipes for space-themed furniture. Flick and CJ, passionate about bugs and fish respectively, would buy specimens at elevated prices and commission decorative models. Red's treasure trawler appeared at the beach, selling artwork that might be genuine or forged, maintaining his traditional role as the sketchy art dealer. These visits added variety to weekly routines. The Able sisters maintained their clothing shop, but with improved functionality. Mabel would set up a temporary stall before the full shop opened, and once established, the store offered a larger selection than in previous games. The back wall featured custom designs from other players via design codes, allowing you to access creations from around the world. Sable, as always, would warm up to you through daily conversations, eventually giving you fabric patterns to use in customization. Halves Island provided a photography studio where you could stage scenes with your villagers and special characters. You could place furniture, change lighting, and position characters to create elaborate photos. This feature was beloved by creative players who used it to tell stories, create themed photo shoots, or simply capture moments with their favourite villagers. Later updates would expand Halves Island into a marketplace where special visitors could set up permanent shops. The game's soundtrack maintained the series' tradition of hourly themes, while introducing new compositions that match the tropical island setting. The music incorporated more acoustic instruments, gentle percussion, and melodies that evoked beach vacations and island life. The nighttime themes were particularly beloved, with the 5 a.m. track becoming iconic for players who stayed up late or woke up early to play. Despite its massive success and many improvements, New Horizons began showing cracks within months of release. The initial honeymoon period, amplified by pandemic circumstances, eventually gave way to growing awareness of the game's limitations and frustrations. Players who had invested hundreds of hours discovered that the content loop, while initially engaging, became repetitive more quickly than in previous entries. The lack of significant post-launch content updates became a major point of criticism. After the initial wave of seasonal events, which were largely repeated from previous games with minimal changes, new content slowed to a trickle. Major updates were infrequent, and when they arrived, they often felt smaller than expected. Players anticipated features from previous games returning, but many never did. Bulk crafting was never added despite constant requests. Villager dialogue was never expanded. Quality of life improvements arrived slowly or not at all. The update that generated the most disappointment was the final major content addition, announced in fall 2021. After months of speculation about substantial new features, the 2.0 update and paid DLC Happy Home Paradise arrived. The free update added Brewster's Cafe, gyroids, new vegetables for farming, and a few other features. The paid DLC focused on designing vacation homes for villagers, which, while well made, felt disconnected from the main island experience. What frustrated players most was the declaration that this would be the final major content update. After only a year and a half of post-launch support, Nintendo was essentially declaring the game complete and moving on. Compared to games like Stardew Valley, or even Nintendo's own Splatoon series, which received years of substantial free content updates, this felt premature. New Horizons had sold over 40 million copies, making it one of Nintendo's most successful games ever. Yet its support timeline was relatively brief. The community's reaction revealed a shift in expectations. Players had embraced New Horizons as a live service game, anticipating years of ongoing development and content additions. When Nintendo treated it as a traditional release with a defined endpoint, many felt betrayed. The game had sold itself as an ongoing experience, with seasonal events and updates keeping things fresh. The early cessation of meaningful updates left many feeling that the game's potential had been wasted. This brings us to the complicated question of New Horizons' legacy. By almost any metric, it was a phenomenal success. It reached audiences far beyond the gaming community. It provided comfort and connection during one of the most challenging periods in recent history. It demonstrated that games could be cultural touchstones and social platforms as much as entertainment products. It sold an absurd number of copies and became many people's introduction to Nintendo and gaming in general. Yet among dedicated Animal Crossing fans and long-term players, New Horizons is often viewed as the weakest modern entry. the shallow villager interactions, the restrictive multiplayer, the single island limitation, the slow trickle of content, and the early end of support created a complicated relationship between the game and its community. Many players who invested hundreds or thousands of hours eventually felt disappointed, not because the game was bad, but because it seemed to fall short of what it could have been. The story of New Horizons' decline is not dramatic. There was no single catastrophic update or scandal that drove players away. Instead, it was a gradual erosion of enthusiasm as initial excitement gave way to growing awareness of limitations and unaddressed frustrations. The game that had been everywhere in early 2020 slowly faded from social media timelines and conversation, replaced by newer releases and other cultural phenomena. One of the primary frustrations was the tedium built into basic activities. Crafting items one at a time, with unskippable animations for each action, became increasingly irritating as you progressed. Crafting fishing bait required repetitive menu navigation and button pressing. Creating multiple items meant watching the same animation dozens or hundreds of times. Players begged for bulk crafting options or at least the ability to skip animations, but these quality-of-life improvements never arrived. The durability system for tools was another source of constant frustration. Unlike previous games where tools could be used indefinitely, New Horizons tools would break after extended use, requiring you to craft or purchase replacements. This was presumably intended to create resource sinks and maintain crafting relevance, but in practice it just added tedium. You couldn't see durability meters, so tools would break unexpectedly. The constant need to replace tools felt like busy work rather than engaging gameplay. Inventory management became a problem as the game progressed. Your pockets could hold 40 items, which sounds generous, but fills quickly when gathering resources, shopping, or decorating. Managing storage required frequent trips to your house. Dropping items on the ground to free space created clutter that detracted from your island's appearance. The inability to access storage remotely or expand pocket space beyond the base amount created constant minor frustrations. The single island restriction continued generating complaints throughout the game's life. Players who wanted to experience the early game again, try different island layouts, or maintain separate creative projects had to either purchase a second Switch console or delete their existing island and start over, losing hundreds of hours of progress. This restriction felt arbitrary and anti-consumer, designed to push hardware sales rather than enhance player experience. Multiplayer problems persisted despite their obvious impact on user experience. The inability to have multiple players meaningfully interact simultaneously, the lengthy loading animations for visitors arriving or leaving, and the restrictions on what visiting players could do all combined to make online play feel more cumbersome than fun. Groups of friends trying to play together would spend more time watching loading screens than actually enjoying the game together. The repetitive villager dialogue became increasingly noticeable over time. Characters would recycle the same few conversation topics, tell the same jokes, and make the same observations week after week. The illusion of personality that previous games had maintained couldn't survive the reduced dialogue pool. Players would eventually start skipping conversations entirely, which undermined one of the series' core appeals, building relationships with your virtual neighbours. The lack of mini-games or varied activities compared to New Leaf was conspicuous. New Leaf had island tours that offered structured challenges. New Horizons had mystery islands, but these were primarily resource-gathering opportunities rather than varied gameplay experiences. There were no tournaments beyond the occasional fishing or bug-catching competitions. No hide-and-seek games with villagers. No treasure hunts or other diversions. The activity loop was narrower than in the previous entry, Many beloved features from previous games were absent and never returned. The Roost Cafe, where you could work part-time serving coffee to villagers, was eventually added but in a diminished form without the job element. Gyroids, collectible items that made sounds and could be arranged musically, were missing at launch and arrived over a year later. The Dream Suite appeared eventually, but other features like the police station, fortune teller, and various shops never materialized. The lack of these features felt particularly strange given that New Horizons had the largest budget and development team of any Animal Crossing game. Players expected the new entry to include everything from previous games plus new additions, not to launch with less content and slowly add back features that already existed in earlier entries. The feeling that New Horizons was incomplete at launch and never truly became complete persisted throughout its active development. Some critics noted that New Horizons' focus on player creativity and expression while producing amazing community content came at the expense of the game providing its own compelling content. Previous entries had more structured activities, events, and systems that the developers had created. New Horizons seemed to rely more heavily on players creating their own fun through building and decorating, which not everyone found satisfying long-term. The update cadence also became a problem. Seasonal events were delivered just before they occurred, meaning players couldn't look forward to upcoming content or plan around events. The updates themselves were often small, adding a few items or minor features rather than substantial new systems or activities. The sense that Nintendo was drip-feeding content that should have been included at launch created resentment. The paid DLC, Happy Home Paradise, highlighted another tension. While the DLC was well made and offered substantial content for designing vacation homes, many players felt that resources dedicated to paid add-ons should have gone toward improving the base game. The DLC added quality-of-life improvements like being able to polish and reorganize your storage, but locking these basic features behind a paywall felt exploitative. Time traveling, the practice of changing the system clock to skip forward or backward, became more contentious in New Horizons than in previous entries. The game's slow pace and time-gated content encouraged time travel more than ever. Players who didn't time travel could feel left behind as others raced ahead, completed their islands, and moved on. Meanwhile, time travelers were criticized by some for playing wrong and ruining the intended experience. The community itself became more fractured over time. Early in New Horizons' life, the community was united in excitement and creativity. As problems became apparent and development support waned, divisions emerged. Some players remained devoted and defended the game against criticism. Others felt increasingly frustrated and vocal about disappointments. Arguments about time traveling, the right way to play, and whether criticism was fair or entitled became common in community spaces. Social media platforms that had been flooded with positive New Horizons content gradually shifted. The initial wave of beautiful island tours and creative achievements gave way to memes about tedium, complaints about lack of updates, and eventually nostalgia posts about how great the game had been during its peak. The cultural moment had passed, and what remained was a large but less engaged player base gradually drifting away. YouTubers and streamers who had built audiences around New Horizons faced declining viewership as interest waned. Many diversified into other games or shifted focus to different content. The most dedicated creators continued covering the game, but even they acknowledged that meaningful new content to discuss had slowed to nearly nothing. The game that had dominated gaming content in early 2020 had become difficult to sustain as a content focus by late 2021. To understand both Animal Crossing's rise and its current challenges, we need to examine the design philosophy that has always underpinned the series. From the beginning, Animal Crossing has been about patience, routine, and finding satisfaction in simple, repeatable activities. It rejects the dopamine spike reward structures of many modern games in favour of gentle, sustained engagement. This philosophy has been both its greatest strength and, increasingly, a limitation. The series has always moved slowly, asking players to engage on its terms rather than theirs. You cannot rush the passage of seasons. You cannot force villagers to move in or out quickly. You cannot instantly complete collections or max out your house. This deliberate pacing creates a particular rhythm that some players find meditative and satisfying. For others, especially in an era of instant gratification and endless entertainment options, it can feel frustrating and outdated. New Horizons leaned further into player-driven content creation than previous entries. By providing extensive customization tools, terraforming, and the ability to share designs globally, the development team essentially invited players to create the game's content themselves. This approach generated incredible community creations and viral moments. Players built elaborate theme parks, recreated locations from other games and media, and expressed themselves in ways previous entries never enabled. However, this player-centric design philosophy had a cost. By focusing resources on tools and systems for player expression, less development time went toward crafted experiences, varied activities, and deep character interactions. The game became more of a creative platform and less of a curated experience. For some players, this was exactly what they wanted. For others, it felt like the developers had outsourced content creation to the community rather than providing a complete game. The balance between accessibility and depth has always been delicate for Animal Crossing. The series wants to welcome everyone, including people who don't typically play games. But it also wants to satisfy dedicated players who will invest thousands of hours. New Horizons skewed heavily toward accessibility, with simplified systems and clearer objectives, but this came at the expense of the hidden depth and discovery that made previous entries feel rich and mysterious. Previous games had secrets and surprises that took years to discover. Special events had hidden elements. Villager dialogues contained rare variations that felt special when you encountered them. There were tricks and techniques that veteran players could share with newcomers, creating a sense of community knowledge. New Horizons, by contrast, laid everything bare. Within weeks, data miners had extracted every detail, and within months, most players felt they'd seen everything the game had to offer. The innovation challenge facing Animal Crossing is complex. The series has established a strong identity with clear expectations. Players want certain features, certain rhythms, certain feelings, but they also want novelty, progress, and evolution. How do you innovate within such a defined framework without alienating the existing fan base or diluting what makes the series special? New Leaf answered this question brilliantly by expanding player agency without fundamentally changing the core experience. You became mayor, which felt significant and new, but the day-to-day activities remained familiar. Public works projects gave you long-term goals without demanding constant attention. The game evolved the formula while respecting what made it work. New Horizons attempted even bolder innovation with crafting and terraforming, and these features were genuinely transformative. But in pursuing these new systems, the development teams seemingly had to compromise on other elements. The result was a game that innovated in some areas while regressing in others, creating an uneven experience that excelled at something while disappointing in others. The live service approach that Nintendo attempted with New Horizons created its own problems. By releasing the game in what many players perceived as an incomplete state, and promising to add content over time, Nintendo set expectations for ongoing development and support. When that support ended sooner than expected, players felt abandoned. The game had sold extraordinarily well, yet Nintendo moved on to other projects while significant issues remained unaddressed. This raises questions about Nintendo's priorities and how they view the Animal Crossing franchise. Is it a prestige series that receives sustained attention and resources, or is it a reliable seller that can be released, supported minimally, and then left to coast on its established appeal? The treatment of New Horizons suggests the latter, which concerns fans hoping for future entries that receive the development attention they feel the series deserves. The comparison to other life simulation games highlights Animal Crossing's challenges. Games like Stardew Valley, which was developed by essentially one person, received years of substantial free updates that added new areas, characters, activities, and systems. Games like The Sims, despite their controversial DLC practices, at least continue expanding content and features over extended periods. Animal Crossing's update support felt modest by these standards, especially given its massive commercial success. Some defenders argue that Animal Crossing was never meant to be a live service game, that Nintendo simply added seasonal content as a courtesy, and the community's expectations became unrealistic. This perspective has merit, but it ignores Nintendo's own messaging and the reasonable expectations created by releasing an incomplete game with the promise of updates. If Nintendo wanted to release a complete, finite experience, they should have included all content at launch. The challenge moving forward is whether Nintendo can recapture the magic of New Leaf, while incorporating the best innovations from New Horizons and addressing the valid criticisms that have emerged. Can the next Animal Crossing have both extensive customization and deep villager interactions? Can it provide both player-driven creativity and developer-crafted content? Can it respect the series' deliberate pacing while reducing tedium and frustration? These questions don't have easy answers. Game development is always a series of compromises and trade-offs. But New Horizons' trajectory suggests that Nintendo hasn't found the right balance yet. The game's initial success may have obscured underlying problems that only became apparent after the pandemic. Driven boom faded and players settled into long-term engagement. Despite its problems, New Horizons created something remarkable during its peak. The community that formed around the game was creative, generous, and deeply engaged. Players helped each other, shared resources freely, and celebrated each other's achievements. The game became a canvas for expression, a meeting place for friends, and a comfort during difficult times. The custom-designed community exemplified this creativity. Talented artists created elaborate patterns and shared them freely. Fashion designers and brands created virtual clothing lines. Museums offered digital art collections. The ability to instantly share and download designs democratized creativity, allowing anyone to benefit from the talents of skilled designers while contributing their own ideas. Island designers pushed the game's tools to their limits, creating spaces that were genuinely impressive as artistic achievements. Players built elaborate Japanese villages with authentic architecture and landscaping. They created horror islands with ominous lighting and unsettling details. They reconstructed locations from other games, movies, and real life with astonishing accuracy. The dedication and skill on display demonstrated that New Horizons had successfully become a platform for creative expression. The trading community that emerged around New Horizons was vast and complex. Players established marketplaces on Reddit, Discord, and dedicated websites. They developed pricing standards for rare items and villagers. They created services where experienced players would craft items, design sections of islands, or help newcomers progress. This player-driven economy operated entirely on trust and goodwill, as the game included no built-in trading systems or protections. The community also served social functions beyond the game itself. During lockdowns, Animal Crossing friend groups became crucial social connections. People would schedule regular island visits like weekly coffee dates. They would celebrate birthdays and holidays together when physical gatherings weren't possible. The game became infrastructure for maintaining friendships and family connections across distance and isolation. Educational uses of New Horizons emerged organically. Teachers created virtual classrooms where students could meet and learn. Therapists used the game as a tool for connecting with young clients. Museums and cultural institutions created educational content within the game, reaching audiences who might never have engaged with them otherwise. The game's accessibility and non-threatening environment made it valuable in contexts far beyond entertainment. The representation and inclusivity that New Horizons offered mattered to many players. The ability to create characters of any appearance, without gender restrictions or limited options, meant more people could see themselves in the game. The ability to design clothing and spaces that reflected personal identity made the game feel welcoming. While there's always room for improvement, New Horizons represented progress in making gaming spaces more inclusive. The disability community found value in Animal Crossing as well. For players with mobility limitations, anxiety disorders, or other conditions that make traditional gaming difficult, Animal Crossing's low-pressure gameplay and absence of fail states provided accessible entertainment. The game's predictability and routine could be comforting for players who struggled with unpredictability in other aspects of life. The nostalgic appeal of Animal Crossing created intergenerational connections. Parents who had played Wild World in college introduced their children to New Horizons. Older players who had aged with the series could share their villages with younger family members. The game's timeless themes of community, nature, and creativity transcended age differences, creating shared experiences across generations. However, the community also experienced tensions and problems. The intense popularity created pressure to have perfect islands. Players would compare their creations to the highly curated content they saw on social media and feel inadequate. The game's emphasis on customization and expression could make people feel judged for their creative choices. What was meant to be a relaxing, personal experience sometimes became a source of anxiety and competition. The turnip market, where players could buy and sell turnips for fluctuating prices, created its own microeconomy with its own problems. Some players charged entry fees for visiting islands with high turnip prices. Scams emerged where players would steal from islands they visited. The friendly, trusting community had to develop rules and protections as it scaled to millions of players. The villager trading community raised ethical questions. Popular villagers became commodities, with players charging real money or valuable items for the opportunity to invite certain characters to your island. This commodification of what were meant to be organic relationships felt wrong to many players. The practice highlighted how the game's social elements could be corrupted when subjected to market forces. Time zone differences and varying play schedules created challenges for international friend groups. The game's real-time mechanics meant that players in different parts of the world were experiencing different times of day and different seasonal events. Coordinating multiplayer sessions required planning and compromise. The feature that made the game feel alive and connected to reality also created barriers to connection. As the pandemic situation improved and people returned to physical social activities, many drifted away from New Horizons. The game had filled a specific need during a specific moment, and as circumstances changed, that need diminished. Islands that had been meticulously maintained fell into neglect. Friend groups that had met regularly stopped logging in. The game that had been essential became optional, then forgotten. This natural cycle of engagement and disengagement isn't unique to Animal Crossing, but it felt more pronounced because of the game's pandemic-era significance. New Horizons will forever be associated with lockdowns, isolation, and the search for connection during crisis. As those memories recede, so too does the urgency that drove so many players to invest so heavily in their virtual islands. The story of Animal Crossing from 2001 to 2022 spans enormous changes in gaming, technology, and culture. The series has evolved from a quirky experiment on the Nintendo 64 to a cultural phenomenon that transcended gaming. Along the way, it has taught us valuable lessons about game design, community, and what people seek from virtual spaces. One clear lesson is that games don't need conflict, competition, or clearly defined victory conditions to be engaging. Animal Crossing proved that play can be gentle, patient, and rewarding without demanding constant escalation or dramatic stakes. This opened doors for other games that prioritized relaxation, creativity, and emotional connection over challenge and achievement. The series demonstrated the power of routine and ritual in game design. By aligning with real-world time and creating daily rhythms, Animal Crossing integrated itself into players' lives in ways that few games achieve. This created strong attachment and regular engagement, though it also risked feeling like obligation. The balance between invitation and demand remains delicate. Animal Crossing showed that customization and player expression could be central to game design rather than peripheral features. The series has consistently expanded creative tools, recognizing that many players find joy in creating, decorating, and sharing their creations. This player-centric design philosophy influenced countless other games that now prioritize personalization and self-expression. The franchise proved that games could serve social functions beyond multiplayer competition. Animal Crossing created spaces for hanging out, for low-stakes interaction, for maintaining relationships through shared activities. This social infrastructure became especially important during the pandemic, demonstrating that virtual spaces could partially substitute for physical ones when necessary. However, the series has also revealed challenges and limitations. The tension between maintaining core identity and innovating meaningfully has not been fully resolved. Each entry tries new things, but also faces criticism for what it changes or what it fails to improve. Finding the right balance between familiar and novel remains an ongoing challenge. The treatment of New Horizons post-launch support highlighted questions about Nintendo's commitment to the series and understanding of player expectations. The early end of meaningful updates, despite the game's unprecedented success, suggested that Nintendo saw Animal Crossing as a traditional release rather than an ongoing platform. This disconnect between player expectations and developer intent created disappointment that may affect future entries. The single island limitation and multiplayer restrictions demonstrated that Nintendo's protective instincts and technical decisions don't always align with player desires. While safety and security are important, especially for younger players, overly restrictive systems can diminish enjoyment. Future entries need to find better balance between protection and freedom. The reduction in villager personality and dialogue showed that not all simplification improves the experience. Sometimes depth matters more than accessibility, and the charm of these games depends on feeling like you're building real relationships with characters. Future games need to prioritize rich, varied dialogue and distinct personalities if they want to recapture what made earlier entries special. Looking toward the future of Animal Crossing, several paths seem possible. Nintendo could play it safe, creating another entry that iterates modestly on established systems without taking major risks. This would likely sell well based on brand recognition, but might not generate the enthusiasm needed for long-term engagement and cultural impact. Alternatively, Nintendo could take the criticism seriously and create an entry that combines the best elements of New Leaf and New Horizons while addressing known problems. This would mean deeper villager interactions, more varied activities, better quality of life features, and sustained post-launch support. This approach requires significant investment and commitment, but could restore faith in the series. A third possibility is that Nintendo might reimagine Animal Crossing more radically, perhaps moving it toward a truly persistent online world or experimenting with different genres and formats. This carries the most risk, but also the most potential reward. The series has always been willing to try new ideas, and perhaps bold innovation is what's needed to recapture lightning in a bottle. Some fans hope for remakes or remasters of earlier entries, particularly New Leaf, which many consider the series' peak. This would allow new players to experience these games and might generate goodwill while the team works on the next mainline entry. However, remaking games that relied so heavily on real-time mechanics and online features that no longer exist would present technical and design challenges. The mobile space remains largely unexplored beyond Pocket Camp. A different approach to mobile Animal Crossing, perhaps one that complemented console games rather than standing alone, could expand the series' reach without compromising its design principles. Integration between mobile and console experiences could create interesting possibilities for maintaining connection to your island even when away from home. Whatever direction the series takes, it will carry the weight of New Horizons' complicated legacy. The game's massive success proved Animal Crossing's potential to reach mainstream audiences. Its eventual decline and community disappointments highlighted areas needing improvement. Any future entry will be measured against both the peak heights and the frustrating limitations of New Horizons. The fundamental appeal of Animal Crossing remains strong. People still want spaces for creativity, connection, and comfort. They still want games that respect their time while providing satisfying routines. They still want to build communities, express themselves, and escape into gentle virtual worlds. The question is whether Nintendo can deliver experiences that fulfill these desires while learning from past mistakes. The rise and fall of Animal Crossing isn't a story with a clean ending because the story isn't over. The series will continue in some form because it represents ideas and experiences that resonate across cultures and demographics. What remains to be seen is whether future entries can recapture the magic of the series' best moments while avoiding the pitfalls that have emerged. For now, millions of islands sit quiet, visited occasionally by their creators who check in to see how things have grown in their absence. Villagers wave hello, seemingly unaware of how much time has passed. The museum still stands, its exhibits complete or nearly so. Weeds have grown in places, flowers have spread, and the peaceful soundtrack continues playing to mostly empty towns. And so we come to rest at the end of our journey through the history of Animal Crossing. From train rides to deserted islands, from the Nintendo 64 to the Switch, from a curious experiment to a cultural phenomenon, and back to something quieter, more uncertain. This series has given millions of players comfort, creativity, and connection across 2 decades. The story of Animal Crossing is ultimately a human story. It's about what we seek when we come home after long days. It's about the simple pleasure of routine and the satisfaction of caring for spaces, even digital ones. It's about finding community in unexpected places and building relationships with characters that exist only as code and text, but feel real enough to matter. The rise was spectacular, but not surprising in retrospect. These games tapped into fundamental human desires for control, creativity, and belonging. They offered worlds that were safe, predictable, and infinitely customizable. They asked for patience and rewarded it with small, steady moments of joy and accomplishment. In a chaotic world, they provided order. In isolating times, they provided connection. The fall, such as it was, came not from any dramatic failure, but from the inevitable deflation that follows any peak. From the gap between what was delivered and what was hoped for. From the tension between preservation and evolution. From the challenge of meeting expectations that had grown with each successful entry. New Horizons didn't fail. It simply couldn't sustain the unprecedented heights it reached during its perfect storm moment. What remains is a series still searching for its next chapter, still valuable, still beloved by many, but facing questions about its future direction and whether it can recapture the cultural relevance it briefly achieved. The answers will come with time, with the next entry, with whatever form Animal Crossing takes as gaming and culture continue evolving. For those who played these games, who invested hours and emotion into virtual villages and islands, the memories remain. The feeling of booting up Wild World on your DS before bed, hearing that gentle music, checking in with your animal neighbours. The satisfaction of completing your museum in New Leaf, of building that perfect public works project, of finally getting your dreamy villager to move in. The pandemic evening spent on New Horizons Islands, with friends you couldn't see in person, celebrating birthdays in pixels and polygons because that was what was possible. These moments mattered. They matter still. Not because the games were perfect, but because they provided exactly what we needed when we needed it. They gave us places to go when we felt lost, tasks to complete when everything felt uncertain, and communities to belong to when physical communities were out of reach. The rise and fall of Animal Crossing teaches us that no success lasts forever, that expectations grow with each achievement, and that what works in one moment may not work in the next. But it also teaches us that games can be more than entertainment. They can be comfort, connection, and creative expression. They can be mirrors reflecting our needs and desires. They can be homes, even temporary ones, for heart-seeking rest. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself there, on your old Wild World island, or your New Leaf town, or your New Horizons paradise. The sun is setting, painting the sky in soft colours. Your favourite villager waves from across the plaza. The owly music shifts to evening's gentle melody. Everything is as you left it, patient and waiting, preserved perfectly in memory. There's no rush, no pressure, no demands. Just the quiet satisfaction of a space that's yours, shaped by choices you made across days and weeks and months. The flowers you planted, the paths you laid, the furniture you arranged just so. All of it still there, still meaningful, still carrying the weight of time you invested and joy you found. The bells in your pocket jingle softly as you walk. A shooting star streaks overhead. The museum glows warmly in the distance. Somewhere Tom Nook is closing up shop for the evening, counting the day's earnings. Isabel is preparing tomorrow's announcements. Your neighbours are heading home to sleep, ready to greet you again tomorrow or whenever you return, and that's the gift Animal Crossing has always offered. Not perfection, but presence. Not endless excitement, but steady comfort. Not dramatic stories, but quiet routines. A reminder that sometimes the most meaningful experiences are the simplest ones. A fishing rod, a butterfly net, a shovel, and time. Time to watch seasons change. Time to see trees grow. Time to build something worth visiting, worth maintaining, worth remembering. Sleep now, knowing that somewhere, in memory or on a console gathering dust, your village still exists. Your island still floats in its ocean. Your work persists. The friends you made there still wait in their houses, ready to remind you that you're always welcome home, that you can always return, that the door is always open, and the light is always on, and the music is always playing softly in the background, carrying you gently into dreams of simpler times and softer places. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the rise and fall of Animal Crossing. I hope it brought back warm memories, or perhaps introduced you to a series worth exploring. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share your own Animal Crossing memories in the comments below. What was your favourite entry? Your favourite villager? Your fondest memory of playing? For now, rest well. Let the gentle rhythms of Animal Crossing carry you into peaceful sleep, and remember, whether in games or in life, sometimes the most important thing is simply to show up, to care for what you've built, and to appreciate the small, steady joys that make each day worthwhile. Good night, and sweet dreams of virtual villages and island paradises. May your turnip prices always be high, your villagers always be kind, and your perfect town forever free of weeds. Good night.